This is the Big Stories Podcast, where we tell the amazing and inspiring stories from across the Big 12 Conference.
It's the start of a new season on the Big Stories Podcast. Welcome to season number 3. I'm your host and producer, Cleon Wall. This is also the start of a new era of the pod. Let me explain. But to do that, I need to go back to the year 2023. It was the spring before BYU entered the Big 12, and our bosses here at BYU Broadcasting decided they wanted to produce feature television stories of BYU's football opponents and some of the Cougars' opponents in basketball. At the same time, they tasked me with turning some of those stories into a podcast and finding some of our own tales to tell. That's the genesis of BYUradio's Big Stories podcast and the BYUtv series Big Stories. It's a privilege to work on these inspiring and tremendous tales of triumph. But the Big Stories podcast team wanted to try out something new for season 3. We wanted to expand the brand, so here's what we're going to do. We are going to tell the big stories from on and off the field. So what does that mean? It means we will still tell remarkable stories from around the Big 12, but instead of just focusing on BYU's opponents, we are going to focus on every team in the Big 12. We will start out with Kansas State and make our way around the conference telling one fantastic tale after another. No school will be missed. We will also release episodes featuring the big stories on the field or court, the best highlights, the biggest names, and the astounding plays from the previous week. We will also award a big man and a best woman on campus each week, and we couldn't do it without the help of a team of podcasters from across the Big 12. You might be asking yourself, why begin this week? It's technically week 0, but 3 Big 12 teams start their season on Saturday. Kansas is hosting Fresno State, and the Farmageddon rivalry is in Ireland for the 109th meeting between Kansas State and Iowa State. So for episode 1, we're going to take a quick tour around the Big 12 and find out the biggest storyline from the league's football teams. We will go in alphabetical order so we don't play any favorites. Let's start with the University of Arizona. Here is Damon Fairall from the AZ Wildcats podcast from PHNX Sports.
In year 1 of Brent Brennan, the Arizona Wildcats had an absolute disaster season, finishing 4-8 after being predicted in the preseason Big 12 poll to have a top 3 to 4 finish in the conference, only finishing above Utah and Oklahoma State. But how do things get better for the Wildcats in year 2? Brent Brennan in year 1 hired Dino Babers from Syracuse, notably the head coach of Syracuse over there, to be his offensive coordinator after not calling plays for over a decade of college football. Turned out to be a complete disaster for Noah Fafita and co. No run game to speak of, and no outside supplementary weapons outside of notably Totri and McMillan, who finds his way to the NFL as a top 10 draft pick for the Carolina Panthers. No T-Mac this year, but the Wildcats supplemented that room with a lot more options, a deep wide receiver room that gives Noah Fafita more to work with. And like I said, that offensive coordinator role being so pivotal here in the story of year 2 Brent Brennan for the Arizona Wildcats. Seth Doege brought in, was the starting quarterback for Mike Leach at Texas Tech back in the day, brings air raid principles to the table, won the Sun Belt last year as Marshall's offensive coordinator, now comes to Arizona. Seems to be a star in the making. Everybody that you talk to in and around Arizona football loves Seth Doege, can only say positive things about him, his energy, and what he brings to the table on a daily basis. Does Arizona truly have a star offensive coordinator in the making, a guy who's in his mid-30s who looks to be a real riser in this business, already landed a top 10 quarterback recruit in the 2026 cycle? So is Seth Doege really the truth? I think that's going to be, kind of the decider of what happens for the Arizona Wildcats this year. If he is that special offensive coordinator, you could really see a resurgence under Brent Brennan in year 2. But if it turns out to be yet another poor hire from Brent Brennan, then the Wildcats could be looking for a new coach in year 3.
Let's head north of Tucson along I-10 to the home of the reigning Big 12 champions, the Arizona State Sun Devils. It's all about the offensive playmakers in Tempe. Here is PHNX Sun Devils podcast host Anthony Totri.
The Arizona State Sun Devils, a team that everybody is looking out for in the Big 12. But what are the biggest storylines, or maybe the one biggest storyline in Tempe? Well, of course, it has to do with maybe the best quarterback wide receiver duo in all of college football in 2025. Sam Leavitt and Jordan Tyson, the princes that were promised in this case in Tempe for your Arizona State Sun Devils. Of course, Cam Scatterbox gone, headed to the NFL with the New York Giants. The biggest storyline is, can Sam Leavitt and Jordan Tyson replace the production that Arizona State, specifically Kenny Dillingham and Marcus Arroyo, had in 2024? Well, all signs point to yes. Jordan Tyson, a projected first-round pick in the 2026 NFL Draft, potentially the number one wide receiver off the board, and then a Heisman candidate in Sam Leavitt at the helm, a redshirt sophomore quarterback. Another year in the system for Sam Leavitt and Jordan Tyson. If those guys can produce at a level similar to what Cam Scatterbox was capable of doing in 2024, then you can definitely expect those Arizona State Sun Devils to be back in Dallas for another trip to the Big 12 championship game. The number 11 team to start the college football season. We'll see if Sam Leavitt and Jordan Tyson can take them to the top.
And now to Waco, Texas, the home of the Dr. Pepper Museum, which happens to be my wife's favorite museum of all time. It's also home of the Baylor Bears.
This is Ashley Hodge with Sikkim 365. Hello, fellow Big 12 fans. Let's talk the Baylor Bears. Baylor Bears fans are very optimistic about this upcoming season, 2025. Why are they optimistic? Well, it has a lot to do with how they finished the season last year. Started the season 2-4. Dave Aranda was on the hot seat. But then they turned things around and won the last 6 games of the Big 12 regular season, finished 8-4 before going to a bowl game against LSU. Competitive game, but ended up losing 44-31. But really the optimism turned with the offensive production. They really unleashed a really good running game starting in the Texas Tech game last year, game 7 of their season, and got that running game rolling, and the offense was really good from that point forward. They returned 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen. They returned a terrific quarterback in Sawyer Robertson, who can beat you with his feet and his arm. Bryson Washington, their star running back, who really had a great end of the season last year, is back as well. They've got some other guys, young guys, that they're really confident in, a bunch of 4-star guys at running back. And then the pass receiving game should be really strong as well. Josh Cameron should be an all Big 12 caliber receiver. Ashton Hawkins was granted an extra year of eligibility. Michael Trigg will be one of the best tight ends in the country, expected as well. So I think the Bears should have an offense that is reminiscent of the Bryles era, and that gives the Baylor fans lots of room for optimism. Defensively, we will see. Dave Aranda is going to be his second year calling plays. Reputation as one of the top defensive minds in college football. As a coordinator and as a head coach, there's been up and down results. He's optimistic for some reasons. He loves his cornerback play. He thinks he has 4 really good cornerbacks, and that's something you can hang your hat on. Defensive line, he made the comment that he has 3 outstanding nose tackles, and never felt like in coaching he had 3 before, always 2, but never 3. So he's got some depth there. Jackie Marshall is the headliner on the defensive line, expected to really do a good job getting after the opposing team's quarterback. They got some quick twitch guys on the edge. But the real reason for optimism defensively is he made a shocking statement at Big 12 Media Day. He said this is the best linebacking crew he's ever coached. And that includes his days at LSU, where he won a national championship. So we will see. The schedule's tough. At Auburn in Waco, Friday night game, chrome helmets, black uniforms, going to be a great atmosphere, and on the banks of the Brazos. And then you got at SMU. So those 2 games are about as tough as you could possibly ask for out of the gate. And then the Big 12 schedule's a little bit front loaded as well. You got Arizona State in Waco for game 1 of the Big 12 schedule, at Oklahoma State, Kansas State, another Big 12 title contenders coming into Waco, and then you go to your rival at TCU in Fort Worth. So we'll know by mid-October whether the Bears are pretenders or contenders.
Now on to BYU. I wonder what the biggest storyline is out of the former quarterback factory. Here is the Deep Blue podcast host and the studio host of the BYU Sports Network, Jason Shepard.
The biggest storyline for BYU football this season is by far who will be the starting quarterback. It wasn't something that anybody expected following the conclusion of last season, but with the departure of Jake Retzloff to Tulane, the Cougars will have a new signal caller when the season kicks off on August 30th at home against Portland State. Heading into fall camp, the three quarterbacks vying for the starting job were McKay Hillstead, a transfer from Utah State who was on the roster last season, Trayson Bourget, a transfer from Western Michigan who was also on the team in 2024, as well as freshman transfer Bear Bachmeier, who went through spring at Stanford. As fall camp has progressed, BYU offensive coordinator Aaron Roderick has narrowed the candidates down to two, saying the offense can't keep spreading the reps around to three players. Bachmeier and Hillstead have been getting the reps with the ones and twos, with the true freshmen running mostly with the ones. If BYU does go with a true freshman quarterback, having three winnable games before Big 12 play begins could be just what the Cougars need and a perfect recipe for breaking in a new QB.
Across the Rocky Mountains we go to find out what's happening with Deion Sanders' Colorado Buffaloes. Here's Ryan Koenigsberg.
What's up, guys? RK from DNVR Buffs here, and the biggest storyline for the Colorado Buffaloes this season, I would say, is twofold. It starts, of course, with how do you replace superstars like Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders? You are losing the Heisman winner, you are losing the Johnny Unitas Golden Arm Award winner, and all the other awards those two guys racked up. And the answer to that question most likely starts at the quarterback position, where five-star phenom Julian Lewis is battling it out with Caden Salter for the starting job. And as it stands right now, it certainly seems like Salter, the veteran, the senior, is going to get the first crack at it. And he's got an impressive background coming out of Liberty. This is a guy in Caden Salter who is tied with Cade Klubnik over the last two seasons for most touchdowns accounted for in college football, with 66 touchdowns, including a 2023 season where Salter had 2,800 yards passing, 32 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions through the air to go along with 163 carries for 1,089 yards on the ground and 12 touchdowns with that. Can Salter recreate that 2023 magic with a much better group of weapons at Colorado than he had at Liberty, especially last season? Or will it be Juju Lewis, the five-star freshman with an absolute rocket arm who set all sorts of records in the state of Georgia and should be going into his senior year of high school right now, but forwent his senior year of high school to reclassify and comes into Colorado as a 17-year-old freshman? It's going to be really interesting to see how that shakes out. And if I had to guess, I think both players will get on the field, especially early in the season for the Buffs. And since we're talking about replacing two superstars, I would be remiss if I don't mention Omarion Miller, the wide receiver who has really kind of been hanging in the shadows the last 2 years behind a great group, including 4 guys who went to the NFL last year, but may have one of the highest ceilings of anyone in that room over the last 2 years, not named Travis Hunter. Look out for Omarion Miller and whatever quarterback it is for Colorado to kind of fill those shoes as the new superstars for Coach Prime and the Buffs.
Let's head next to Cincinnati and one of the hosts of the Chatterbox Bears podcast, Charlie Walter.
Last season was anything but beautiful for the Cincinnati Bearcats. There were some good moments. Unfortunately, they were just moments. It was never complete games, it felt like. Starting early in the season when they had Pittsburgh beyond the ropes. They were destroying Pittsburgh at Nippert Stadium and ended up blowing that game, a 3-touchdown lead in the fourth quarter. Mistakes in the special teams unit consistently plagued the Bearcats, as did their situational play late in first halves, where other teams would score late, where the Bearcats would miss opportunities to put points up on the board late. And that was kind of the storyline of their season for the beginning half, where the Cats were actually 5-2, could have legit been 7-0, were in the Big 12 race. 5-2, good start, right? Not a great finish. They finished 5-7 on the season, losing their final 5 games, looking lifeless in their final few. And boos at Nippert Stadium could be heard as Scott Satterfield was walking off the field for the last game of the season. This is year 3 for Satterfield. He took over for Luke Fickell, the transition into the Big 12 Conference. Remember, it was just 4 or 5 years ago that Luke Fickell in 2021 had the Bearcats in the college football playoff. And in 2 seasons, a combined 8 wins for Scott Satterfield. He needs to make a bowl game this season, or you would have to think his time at Cincinnati will be over. Satterfield does bring back his quarterback, Brendan Sorsby, who showed some serious flashes last season, throwing for over 2,800 yards, 18 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions, and showing the ability to make some plays happen with his feet, 447 yards on the ground for 9 touchdowns, over 4 yards per carry for Sorsby. Unfortunately, the question is, who is he going to be throwing to? Because he does not return a single receiver. Now, he returns Joe Royer, who had over 500 yards last year as a tight end. He is a legit first-round NFL prospect. But receiver-wise, does not return a single player to the Bearcats that had over 25 receiving yards a season ago. So a complete unknown, and the transfer portal was relied on heavily this offseason. We will see what the new receivers bring to the fold for the Bearcats. As for the running back, he's got some big-time experience. It's Tawee Walker, who transfers from the Wisconsin Badgers, Luke Fickell. He had 864 yards and 10 touchdowns in the Big Ten a season ago. The run defense is going to be the best part of UC's team, you would think, just based on the personnel. Jake Golday, one of the top linebackers in the Big 12, and the Godfather, Dante Corleone, stuffing things up in the middle. The biggest question entering the season, can the Bearcats find any sort of explosive play on offense that doesn't involve their running back, Evan Pryor, who was their home run hitter a season ago, a transfer from Ohio State? He had 50-plus yard runs and touchdowns. It felt like. But aside from Pryor, they really struggled to find much through the air that didn't involve going to the sticks. Can they find some explosive plays on offense? And can their defense, specifically their defensive backs, hold up in the Big 12 and stop those big plays that continuously crushed them a season ago?
Thank you very much, Charlie. We would next go to Houston, but the podcasters near the Gulf Coast were extra busy this week. Hopefully we can get a preview with them next week. On to Ames, Iowa, and the host of the SciCast podcast and voice of the Iowa State Cyclones, John Walters.
Perhaps the biggest storyline of the Cyclone season will be replacing 2 talented receivers now with the Houston Texans. Jalen Knoll and Jaden Higgins combined for 17 touchdowns and just under 2,400 receiving yards last season. It'll be a team effort to fill that void with some talented new receivers on campus, but also a deep and strong tight ends room. Benjamin Bramer was injured much of last season, which allowed Gabe Burkle to emerge. But now that the two are healthy and on the field together, the tight ends will become an even bigger part of the Iowa State passing game. And you have a gamer in Rocco Becht returning for his 3rd season as the starting quarterback. 5 times last season, Becht led a go-ahead drive in the final minutes of a game, and Iowa State won 4 of those games. Defensively, Iowa State was decimated by injuries last season, particularly at linebacker, but that core is now healthy and experienced, which should become a strength for this year's team. Iowa State somehow managed to win a school record 11 games last season, despite ranking 15th among 16 Big 12 teams in rush defense. That's uncharacteristic for a John Haycock defense. Again, injuries were the main culprit, but if Iowa State can get back to being among the Big 12 leaders in rush defense, it could put opponents in more predictable passing situations, which should increase the sack total, which was just 16 a year ago. It all goes hand in hand, but with 3 preseason All-Big 12 players in Jontez Williams, Jeremiah Cooper, and Dominique Orange, Iowa State could and maybe should have one of the Big 12's top defenses.
Let's continue our theme of tapping the voice of football teams. Here's Brian Hanni of the Kansas Jayhawks.
There is optimism and confidence in the air big time in Lawrence, Kansas, as the Jayhawks return to Lawrence this year after spending last season in Kansas City while their new stadium was being built. The reimagined David Booth Kansas Memorial Stadium is absolutely a thing of beauty. The only thing more impressive, perhaps, the roster Lance Leipold has assembled heading into his 5th year. The Jayhawks just missed bowl eligibility by 1 game last year after back-to-back bowl appearances the previous 2 seasons. They're fired up about getting back on track within the Big 12 race and back to the postseason with a roster full of returning veteran talent and 50 newcomers as well, including some high-profile transfer additions. Look for Emmanuel Henderson, a receiver from Alabama, to provide Jalen Daniels the best vertical threat he's had in terms of receiver speed in all 6 of Jalen's seasons here. Le'Shawn Williams will help Daniel Highshaw out in the backfield, and there's some big-time additions defensively as well, including Bengali Kamara up front, Leroy Harris as well. They're really excited about the pressure they'll bring off the edge and in the trenches, as well as through the back end of the defense with DK McDonald taking over as defensive coordinator. Optimism abounds. Hopes are sky high for Kansas football in 2025.
Let's stay in the Sunflower State and hear from John Kurtz, the guy who started the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter and host of the 3 Mob podcast that covers Kansas State.
For the Wildcats, who are, according to many, the Big 12 favorite this year, the biggest storyline is, can Avery Johnson propel this team to get back to a Big 12 championship game? There are a number of questions across the board, even as much as this team can be considered a favorite in the Big 12. New look offensive line, new offensive line coach, new offensive coordinator, having to replace many faces in the secondary, a couple of whom are now in the NFL. But really what it all comes down to for this team is, can Avery Johnson become a more consistent quarterback? Last year, frankly, for a first-year starter and a guy as young as he is, second year in the program, it was a solid to good season. In fact, he set the program record for touchdown passes last year. And there were some very high highs where he flashed his incredible potential. Obviously, everybody knows about the legs, but he had some spectacular throws as well. The problem is Avery Johnson also ran into some games with some back-breaking throws. Think about the Houston game. Think about the BYU game. When things were bad, they were bad last year for Johnson. And the lack of consistency really hurt the K-State offense. So he has Heisman potential in terms of the talent. Many people feel that way. I certainly feel that way after watching the ability and skill set that he has. But can he be a more consistent down the field passer? Avery has talked about this year becoming more of a runner, relying more on his legs and his speed, and that last year he may have been forcing being a pocket passer too much. So maybe stylistically, things change a little bit for Johnson this year. He also seems more comfortable with Matt Wells as the offensive coordinator, the former Texas Tech head coach. He was Avery Johnson's quarterback coach last year. Now he moves up to offensive coordinator after Connor Riley leaves to go be the offensive line coach of the Dallas Cowboys. So what K-State season boils down to, I mean, there are a number of things, but really the one that it comes down to, in my opinion, if this team is going to take the next step, get back to the Big 12 championship game and get to the college football playoff, it rests on the shoulders of Avery Johnson becoming the superstar that he has the potential to be.
We'll have more on Avery Johnson coming up at the end of this episode. We would next go to Stillwater, Oklahoma, but hopefully we can catch up with Oklahoma State next week.
Hi, I'm Melissa Treebwasser for the Frogs Insider podcast on Dave Campbell's Texas Football Network. When you ask any old school football coach what the 2 most important things on the field are, you're going to hear the same answer time and time again. Run the ball, stop the run. In 2024, TCU was frankly not very good at either, and that's the single biggest storyline for the Horned Frogs heading into 2025. Last season, TCU's offense was one-dimensional. They relied almost exclusively on a talented group of veteran receivers in the arm of quarterback Josh Hoover. Hoover delivered, throwing for 3,949 yards and 27 touchdowns, but the ground game was an issue. TCU ranked near the bottom of the Big 12, averaging just 114 yards per game, and most of that production didn't even come from a traditional running back. Instead, it was Savion Williams in the Wildcat formation, who accounted for 322 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns on the ground. Now that Williams is with the Green Bay Packers, that production is gone. For a team to compete for a Big 12 title, they simply can't be that one-dimensional. UTSA transfer Kavorian Barnes brings the downhill style that Sonny Dykes has been looking for and adds a veteran presence alongside Trent Battle to a room that features talented sophomores Nate Palmer and Jeremy Payne, as well as highly touted freshman John Denman. On the other side of the ball, stopping the run was equally as big a problem. The TCU defensive front was a sieve at times, allowing opponents to run all over them. They gave up an average of 160 rushing yards per game, ranking them 91st in the FBS. That's a recipe for disaster in a Big 12 conference that features several physical, run-heavy teams. Sonny Dykes has tried to address these issues. The defensive line gets a much-needed boost from transfer Ansel Din and Boa from Washington, who should slide right next to Marcus Deal as another big-bodied gap filler. On the edges, guys like Paul Ayuwale, freshman All-American Zach Chapman, and veteran Devin Deal should shore up that side and help TCU's run defense be markedly improved from a season ago. We'll know just how much improvement has been made on September 1st because the Horned Frogs opened the season in Chapel Hill against Bill Belichick in his collegiate coaching debut for North Carolina. If there's one thing we know about Bill Belichick, it's that he takes away a team's biggest strength. He's going to try to force Josh Hoover and the Horned Frogs to prove they can run the football. The fate of TCU's 2025 season will be decided in the trenches. They'll get a final exam on that very first Monday night.
Let's stay in the Lone Star State and go to the school where Sonny Dykes' dad, Spike, made a name for himself in West Texas.
What's up, y'all? It's RC Maxfield here for the Red and Black Report, covering all things Texas Tech football and men's basketball. Obviously, football is the talking point of really maybe the entire conference because of what they did in the transfer portal, adding 13 blue chip recruits, one more than the entire Big 12 and everyone else in the conference did in this past portal cycle. Influx of cash has accelerated and elevated expectations for Texas Tech, the likes that really this program has not seen in really almost 2 decades. Now it's put up or shut up time for the Red Raiders, and that is the biggest aspect of this team that we have to look out for is in the past, Texas Tech, they've had high expectations and maybe not have fallen flat on their face, but definitely haven't lived up to them. This year, they're coming in with arguably the most talented roster in the Big 12, high expectations due to the cash and talent that are on this roster, and it's going to have to be one of those seasons where Baron Morton has to be healthy. That's something I'm looking out for. This is the first time in 2 calendar years that starting quarterback Baron Morton has been 100% healthy. This is the first time in his career that he has had this kind of offensive line. This is the first time in his collegiate tenure at Texas Tech that the Red Raiders have had a defense that has not been closer to the bottom half of the Big 12 when it comes to talent. The talent is there for Texas Tech. The biggest thing you have to watch for this year for Texas Tech, simple and plain, is can they live up to these gargantuan expectations? Because you play 3 of the best teams in the conference on the road this year in Utah, Kansas State, and Arizona State. Not to mention you face the Cougars of BYU at home, where it feels like over the past couple years you've had a stinker if you were Texas Tech. In terms of prime example, Baylor last year, where you got absolutely shellacked by the hometown kid in Sawyer Robertson on the opposing sideline. The expectations are the biggest thing to watch for this year because, again, this roster for Texas Tech has multiple levels of pros, whether that's on the defense or the offensive side. But again, talent doesn't always win you games at the end of the day. It sure helps, but this team on paper is the most talented one in the Big 12. It's just put up or shut up time for the Red Raiders out in the 806.
Now let's head to Orlando. Adam Eaton, one of the hosts of the Sons of UCF podcast, reports there are still several unknowns for the Knights.
Perhaps none bigger than the quarterback position itself. Coming off the first live scrimmage of camp, head coach Scott Frost provided an update in his press availability, but did not divulge much information on who is tracking to get the starting nod. Throughout camp, Frost, offensive coordinator Steve Cooper, and quarterbacks coach Mackenzie Milton have all stated that UCF feels comfortable starting any of 3 quarterbacks that are vying for the job. Frost has also repeatedly said he is not in a hurry to announce a starter, and instead will wait for the right player to win the job. After talking to coaches and each of the QBs at a recent Players Media Day, here's what we know so far. Indiana transfer Taven Jackson was the assumed frontrunner for the job based on his P4 pedigree and playing experience. However, in the live sessions that the media has been able to witness, Jackson hasn't always looked particularly sharp. It's important to note that the open sessions are only a fraction of the reps that QBs get, and there's much that the media does not see. So it's possible Jackson has impressed in other drills. He's a self-described downfield thrower, and it would appear that Jackson could get the nod if the coaches are looking to open up the pass game to balance what would appear to be a stout running game. Returning QB Ja'Kuri Brown brings a dynamic skill set to the table, evidenced by some of the highlights from his 2024 campaign with the Knights. In this new system, Brown's ability to make plays with his legs could be an added wrinkle that Frost has historically used in the system. The only knock on Brown is ability in the pass game. Coach Milton has recently shared that Brown has improved in that area since spring camp, but has he done enough to truly separate himself? Brown has declared his best attribute is bringing the juice to the offense. If they feel they need another playmaker, will the coaches tab Brown to be QB1? Lastly, veteran QB Cam Fancher rounds out the group competing for the starting job. He spent time at Marshall and FAU and has shown some flashes of promise, but injuries and inconsistent O-line play have throttled his performances. Since arriving in January, Fancher has spent time learning this new offense and says he feels like he has full command of the scheme. If Ross is looking for a veteran leader who can command the system and make smart decisions, Fancher just might find himself trotting out in the field as QB1. Tonight's open play, August 28th at home against Jacksonville State.
Josh Furlong is the sports director at KSL.com and one of my former coworkers when I worked at KSL. He covers the Utah Utes and is also the host of the Utah Checkdown podcast.
For Utah football, the 2025 biggest storyline is all about the offense. It's a story of redemption, right? After a year of struggles and frustrations of being able to not move the ball after Cam Rising went down with an injury, Utah is now on a mission to be able to show that that's not, indicative of who they are. Over the offseason, they completely retooled the offense. This was a thing where, they got a new offensive coordinator, a coordinator that is much easier to kind of install an offense in the new era in terms of trying to get guys that are coming in through the transfer portal in a quicker timeline. It's not an offense where they have to learn this through years of attrition and everything that way. So this is a much more simple lead up time for this offense. And as part of that, they retooled the entire offense. You do have your offensive line that returns, but outside of that, it's essentially a new offense with Devin Dampier coming back as the starter under center. This is an entirely new offense in the running back room. You've got an entirely new wide receiver room, and they're looking to be able to just see if they can do something different, right? Trying to get hold on a better opportunity in their offensive systems. They feel like they have that opportunity now. They feel like they have the pieces. The biggest question is going to come down to, can they actually do it on the field? It's one thing to say on paper that you can do a certain thing. It's another on the field to be able to do that. But that's going to be the biggest storyline for this team. They clearly didn't feel like they got enough. There were several games last year that despite their poor offensive play, they were still, in a one-possession game late in the season. And so this is a team that feels like if they can just get, at minimum, a moderate offense, they can be a contender for the Big 12. There's still a lot of questions about this. There's still a lot of things that need to be answered when the games actually kick off on August 30th. But this is a situation where they feel like they've made an improvement, and that's the biggest storyline. There's other storylines that could be out there about this team, but by and large, this is a story about redemption on the offensive side of the ball. Can Jason Beck be the guy that can get Utah to a new place? Can Devin Dampier be this true dual-threat quarterback that can really just give Utah a new level of production that they weren't able to get last year? So, among all the things out there that there could be, the offense is always going to be the biggest storyline for this season.
We would end with West Virginia, but those Mountaineer podcasters have been very busy, so we hope to catch up with them soon. Now, earlier in this podcast, I mentioned that we would have more on Kansas State QB Avery Johnson. In the 2024 season, Johnson was trying to raise money for his old high school principal, Chris Botts, who has a rare form of cancer. Johnson was hoping people would donate money for every TD he scored. Well, we're going to have a follow-up to that heartwarming tale in the next episode of Big Stories. A big thanks to all of our podcasters who helped out with this episode. We will put links to their podcasts in the show notes if you want to go check out their most recent episodes. I'm Cleon Wall. More big stories from the Big 12 are on the horizon. Big Stories is a production of BYU Radio.